So hello everyone and welcome to our second Let's Talk Inclusion series, webinar series. In these series, we explore a wide range of strategies to identify and support speech language communication needs with different guest speakers who are experts in their field. So before we start, just some housekeeping notes on this one really. These sessions are recorded, so if you do put any questions, please bear in mind that these are shared at the end, so try to avoid sharing any names or anything that can identify anything confidential. I will say that if you've got any questions, please post them in the chat and they will be picked up towards the end. We'll continue with the session and then come around to the questions at the end. So if you, as the questions come to you, just post them on the chat and we can pick them up at the end with our speakers. The best thing about this second webinar that we're running today is we've pretty much been sold out on this one. We had over 120 people signed up across the world, mainly in the UK, but from other parts of the world too, including Australia, Pakistan, Nigeria, New Zealand. So it's really, really interesting to see. So thank you, everyone. It shows how important this topic is. We saw this in our first webinar series, first webinar we ran. And we got some really positive feedback, so thank you. So the whole idea is that we're going to carry on improving these, bringing other guest speakers on, that hopefully allows you to grow. So before we start, I just want to play a short little clip. Let me just read this. That covers a bit of a system that we have and products that our team has presented.
I got asked why I love teaching. When I got asked why.
I always don't like the second replay. And that's a little introduction video, but let me just introduce myself. My name is Yasir Khan. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Chatterbug. A lot of you have seen me, or I've met some of you. There's a lot of names I did recognize. And thank you for joining us. And some of you for the names I've seen for the first time. So really happy to connect virtually. And I'm basically the individual at Chatterbug who oversees all the operation side of things, looking after our clients based, could be local authorities or the NHS or even our schools. My job is to make sure things are running really, really smooth, looking at developments and looking at ways of frustration in the industry and in ourselves, trying to help us progress further. And today we are joined by two people, our very own Asma Khanum, who's a experienced speech language therapist and the CEO of Chatterbug, a mother of 3. I'm going to tell Asma to say a few words about herself, really. Go for it, Asma.
I'm not sure what it says about your day if you need a slide to remind you who you are. But yes, I am Asma Khanum, and I am a speech and language therapist by background. And I felt like I needed to see this slide to remind me who I am today. It's been one of those days. So I've actually been a speech and language therapist for well over 25 years. I need to sit down and calculate at some point how many years. Maybe one of you can do it for me. I want to say I qualified in, no, I can't remember when I qualified, but I know it's more than 25 years. But anyway, so I started my career working within the NHS and have worked with a number of different organizations across the country, from the south to the north. I've worked in the independent sector for the last 17 years. And I guess one of my greatest achievements is becoming a mum to 2 neurodivergent girls, and third, possibly, watch the spot, we shall see. So I am neurodivergent myself, so I definitely have a lot of experience, as a professional, but also understanding it from lots of different angles. And if you want to know what my special interest is, well, it's speech and language therapy. I absolutely love the field that we work in. I think there is so much speech and language therapists can add, and you can work within the profession and do something different, I think, every year if you really want to do it. It's so broad and diverse. So that's who I am, and I will hand back to Yasir.
Thank you very much, Asma. And the second guest, we know Asma. We obviously know her internally in our organisation. Some of you actually have worked with her a long time ago, maybe. Probably a long time ago, I will say, because she doesn't go in the field as much these days, from what I understand. But the second guest is Rebecca Taylor. Now, this one, Rebecca, thank you for joining us. And Rebecca is the head of SEND and Inclusion in the Children's Services team at the North East Lincolnshire Council. She's a qualified teacher and SENCO and a former head teacher. So she's been there. She has worked her way up, trying to make them changes that most of you really want to happen. And I'm really excited to have Rebecca to join us. Now, I've kind of put down what she does, but I really want Rebecca, can you introduce yourself, please?
I absolutely can. So good afternoon, everybody. As Yasir said, Rebecca Taylor, Head of SEND and Inclusion for North East Lincolnshire Council, started out working as a teaching assistant and a youth worker before qualifying as an English teacher about 17 years ago now. So I've worked in a range of primary, secondary, mainstream provisions, as well as all through specialist provision, being a senior leader in various guises across the education sector as well. So really excited to be joining the conversation this afternoon and bring lots of different experiences, hopefully, to the conversation, but really interested in how we break down barriers to help our children and young people achieve and thrive.
Thank you, Rebecca. If anyone sees a reflection coming from my face, it's not because I'm sweating or anything. Or maybe I am, because this room is hot. I've kind of picked a room with no aircon and no windows that are actually open. So, but it's not because I'm not nervous or anything. Believe me. No, actually, I'm not nervous. But just so you know, so if you see sort of me wiping myself, I'm going to try to find something. But yeah, we'll try to get to open a window at some point. So bear with me on that one. So let's kickstart this session. We've already kickstarted it, and I thought let's start this off based on this article. There was an article published in the Test magazine, which I hope some of you have come across this, but we're going to kickstart it based on this topic, where worsening speech and language skills make teaching more difficult, study finds. What this article talks about is since 2020, 89% of primary teachers and 78% of secondary teachers report worsening oracy skills among students. 44% of primary teachers and 20% of their pupils are below age expected speech levels. The stats are shocking. I know someone's publicizing it. I think most of you guys who work within this industry would probably agree with this. Asma, I'm going to start with you. Do you agree with some of these statements?
I do, absolutely. I think it is systemic, I'm afraid to say. And communication is something that impacts all of us. And the thing about speech and language and communication development is everybody has something to say about it. Parents, professionals, everyone has really valid arguments and points. And the fact that's what was quite surprising for me with this article was that previously we used to talk about speech and language being something associated with children and young people from disadvantaged background, but increasingly, and I've never seen it, written in statistics, but in this particular, 92% of primary and 85% of secondary teachers say that 94% of primary teachers disagree with it just being a disadvantaged background issue. And thinking about 5 years ago, so Chatterbug is based here in the north, in Leeds. And as I explained, I've worked all across the country. And about 5 years ago, I remember going to a conference in the south. And a lot of the schools there weren't as concerned about language. And for them, they felt that their local provisions were sufficient. Fast forward to 2025, go back to the same conference, and the conversation is completely different. Everybody across the country is saying exactly the same thing. Everyone's struggling. And in some ways, the North were a little bit ahead of the game, because it used to be typically associated with children and young people from a disadvantaged background, but actually it's very much on the rise. And one of the contributing factors is access to speech language therapy. We all know, and there is a average vacancy rate, according to our Royal College, of around 20 to 25% SLT posts that are vacant. And they've estimated that we need a 15% increase in the number of SLTs that are trained. But in reality, this works out about 1.7, something along those lines, of new speech and language therapists entering the industry. And it could take, if you take those numbers into account, it could take nearly a decade before we get to the point where we have enough speech and language therapists. And forget a decade, challenges are evolving so fast. Where we are 5 years, 5 years ago, is so different, and the challenges are so great. How, will we ever catch up? So I think for me, it's about, we're asking a lot of our teachers. We're asking them not only to meet the demands of an increasingly complex curriculum, we're also asking them to support children and young people with such a wide range of speech and language needs. And a few years ago, it wasn't as complex as it is now. Speaking to a university today, they were preparing their NQPs to go on placement to work with cases that weren't complex. And now they're having to reevaluate how they train their therapists, because they have to hit the floor running and be able to deal with quite complex speech and language needs right from the offset. So I completely agree. It is troubling, and I just think I feel for the schools. I think we're asking a lot of our schools.
Thank you for that, Asma. And Rebecca, I'm going to bring it to you with a different bit of a spin. Do you disagree with Asma on the article, or agree? Let's put it that way. But in your experience, before you go, in your experience, and based on like your experience and across all the different jobs you've had, how has this shift affected the classroom teaching and learning? What trends have you observed throughout your career? I'll be really interested to know about that.
Yeah, so I agree wholeheartedly with everything that Asma has said. And I think what the article perhaps doesn't pick up on is actually the way in which we communicate in society has changed, which is having a direct influence on how we are teaching some of those key skills and early language skills at the very earliest stages. Traditionally, it was the man who went out to work and the woman stayed at home, whereas increasingly we're seeing two parents working. That has an impact in terms of early language development if there isn't a consistent caregiver, providing that. And similarly, the move to hybrid working or being able to work from home is brilliant in so many respects. But if you've chosen to keep your child at home with you, are they still getting that same level of attention and input that they would if you weren't working from home or weren't working? So I think this is the tip of the iceberg for me in terms of actually where some of that complexity lies. We are seeing overall some of our children coming through as medical science is a wonderful thing. That it also brings with it some significant challenges for those newborn babies who progress in terms of their development and their ability to progress at the same rate and absorb language in the same way that some other children would. So I think in terms of as a society, we look very different now, particularly post-COVID. Overnight, certainly in the organisation I work in, we went from being in offices to working from home. So that is a massive shift in communication. Holding something virtually like this would have been unheard of 5 years ago, wouldn't it? So we have to consider as adults, what does that then mean for how we have to perhaps explicitly teach skills that we wouldn't have necessarily thought of teaching in a different way much earlier on. And we've certainly seen that obviously communication is not just about the language as well. We've seen a significant challenge around attention skills, which go hand in hand with the ability for a child to listen, to respond, in order to be able to develop those speech skills as well to give that response. So I think it's, for me, this is, yes, it is a challenging landscape, and we are asking a huge amount of our teachers, because we are seeing increasingly children arriving in settings not school ready. That phrase is very popular and very out there at the minute. What does it mean to be school ready? And is there a common agreement and understanding that being school ready isn't just about having the skills in speech, but having the skills in terms of attention and listening as well, in a, you know, in this multimodal age where we are constantly bombarded by YouTube, and we can watch anything, anytime, anywhere almost. That's what we're exposing our children to in terms of that screen time as well. So I think it's not just what's in this article, it's much broader, and actually it's got to be a place-based approach, or it's got to encompass the solutions that don't just focus on what we can do within education, but what we can do within our communities in order to support children to develop the skills that they need ultimately for life.
Thank you. That's wonderful. I'm going to just switch screens over it. It's nice hearing what you just said. It brought back a memory. I can tell you stories all day long, to be perfectly honest. So I have to watch. I can eat time away. But I will share this one story with all of you. I remember a long time ago going to one of these shopping centres with my daughter. Now, I remember a time we used to go, you just read a sign and you just read it, and then buttons appeared and you'd press a button and something would happen. It'd say a noise. My child went over, it was a flashing TV screen which had a map of the shopping centre, and she pressed it, nothing happened. She looked at me and went, "It's broken." And I thought, oh my God, we have all these problems, but actually we need to understand how they actually want to learn. Now, my kids have not been given that much screen time. They've stayed away from tech even till today. My 16-year-old was only given a laptop a year ago for a GCSEs, then that was the end of it. I've been quite anti-tech, not in a bad way, just so they can get their head around it. But seeing that, I realised that they were just prone to this quite commonly. So it's really interesting what you're saying. That just came back. I thought I'd share that with you. So moving on, with 89% of the teachers reporting worsening oracy skills, what do you see as the key contributors to this decline, and how much of a role do you think screen time has played with this? And Rebecca, I'm going to come straight back to you on this one.
Yeah, I think you can understand and see, based on some of those previous comments, why teachers would be reporting that, because it's about the understanding of all of that skill set alongside the families that you work with when you're an educator and you're in a setting. Because it's, do we understand that in order for a child to develop the language skills necessary, at the same time they've also got to develop attention skills in order to be able to know when to come in. It's other things about communication as well, around body language, around tone of voice. That's all about how our children are starting to communicate, and are we recognising effectively that some of those skills need much more explicit teaching than we perhaps have done previously. In a very digital age, we all use email to communicate, constantly, text messages, WhatsApp. If your phone rings now, it's almost like, oh, who's ringing me, rather than even engaging in that conversation. And that really good language skills are only developed from the earliest point where you're hearing those good language skills and those conversations as well. And I don't think that they are being heard either at home or in setting in the same way as they once were. We very much resort to quick texting or voice notes at best, which sometimes are not even in full sentences. So it's, what example are we setting to our children, which is also contributing to that statistic as well, I would imagine.
Oh wow, thank you. And Asma, do you want to add something to that? Have you got a different take on it?
No, I'm very much in agreement. I think the three things for me, pandemic definitely had an impact, right? And to be honest with you, I'm definitely one of those who says, right, we've talked the pandemic to death. Let's move forward. But I think we definitely need to acknowledge that it did have an impact. There were missed opportunities there. And traditionally, a lot of parents used to always blame their children's speech and language, differences on not having siblings. But what we do know is that peer-to-peer interaction is really, really important. And actually, it's the fastest way to develop communication skills, because children watch and they learn and they rehearse things through play and obviously during the pandemic, there were far fewer opportunities. Let's also not forget that there were burnt out parents who were working in very, very different way to where they had previously. Work aside, those who were previously working and then were worried about not having an income coming in, we were dealing with a very stressed society. And a stressed society isn't a society that will be able to sit down and have a good conversation with their children, right? So let's not forget that the pandemic did have an impact, and it continues to, because reintegrating back into society after being able to be locked away in your own room, particularly for teens, has had a huge impact. So I would say the pandemic definitely. Secondly, the screen. I think it was the UK Education Committee 2024 report that said that screen exposure almost doubled. And this is in 2020 and 2022, and now we're in 2025. And yeah, so you're one for stories, but I also have a few stories. And one that I always remember is about 12 years ago, I went along to an RCSLT event, and they were talking about how students now access academic information and their attention span, and the impact on their attention span, and how previously students were happy to go away and access academic papers and read these really long, wordy, lengthy documents. And now it had to be about the same length of attention that you would have on an Instagram reel. Fast forward 2025, a conversation with my niece, who said to me, I'm glad that you're out on social media, but you are so old school, and this 3-minute video is too long. So I said to her, how long does it need to be? She said 10 seconds. So attention and listening and how we attend has also changed. And I'm a big believer. Like, I don't like change. I'll be honest with you. As neurodivergent, I'm never going to like change, but it's not something that we can stop. And screens are here. They're a big part of our life. We need to learn how to use them responsibly. And absolutely agree with Rebecca that we need to model that behavior. So if us adults are constantly on our screens, our children are going to be constantly on our screens. And I'm not going to be going around bashing parents about being on screens, because actually 9 out of 10 times a parent is on the screen because of the child, because they're booking something, or they're looking for something, or they're ordering something for their child. So it's not about pointing fingers at parents, because none of us are perfect. It's about really being conscious of our screen use. And even if you watch how families now watch TV, they might be watching a program together, but they're all on their individual devices. That's quite typical of how families are now growing up. One of the other things is that the decline in reading and traditional activities that required conversation. So I'll tackle reading first. I don't know about you. I'm really, really open and honest about my parenting. I find bedtimes stressful. I'm not one of those parents that enjoys having that bedtime routine and reading a story, because I'm very busy and I'm very stressed, and my children have a lot of questions to ask me. However, reading is one of the greatest ways, simplest ways to expose children to vocabulary. Obviously, as a speech and language therapist, as a professional, I'm very conscious of that. So we do make time for reading. But there's a decline in reading as well. So we've got to, that's definitely having an impact on vocabulary acquisition and exposure to the world. Like I grew up in a, working class background. I never went anywhere, and books were my world. I would be transported to zoos and farms and all these magical places through books. I was learning about the wider world through books, and children just don't have that exposure. And then I would say meal times were a big conversation activity, and families don't eat together like they used to. Or they eat in front of the TV, so it reduces those opportunities to communicate, interact, and talk about your day. So there are lots of factors. I would say for me, those are the 3 main ones. Those opportunities to have meaningful conversation it's really, really important, and they're in decline. But the impact all of these things are then having on schools and teachers, let's not forget about that. Like in practical real terms, when a teacher is providing an instruction, they are now having to think about differentiating that instruction for so many children in their class. They might have to repeat that instruction. One child might need it written down in a certain way or presented in a visual way. So that's additional thinking. And let's not forget that behavior is communication, and sometimes behaviors mask what's actually going on. So I think it can on the surface, it may appear that somebody isn't doing very well in literacy or their maths, but actually there is an underlying speech and language need. So actually what our assessment results are now showing, are they an accurate representation of that child's abilities? That's something else that we've got to take into the mix. And I think, having spoken to a lot of teachers just over the last couple of weeks, it's impacting morale, because teachers don't go into teaching wanting to do a bad job. They want to do the best job for every single child or young person that they work with. But it's just not physically possible to be everything to everyone all at once.
Thank you, Asma. But I'm going to keep it with you there for a minute, because you've kind of stretched over into another thing I had on my list of things to ask from the pair of you. But considering 40% of pupils might be below expected speech and language levels, what sort of interventions would you recommend? I'm going to start with you, Asma, to support the people joining this call in them settings.
Okay, so I'm a big one for intervention first. Okay, and I share this story because I really, really believe in this. And my daughter, she's just finished her GCSEs. She keeps saying this phrase to me: intervention first, intervention first. So, you know, ADHD is a part of her presentation, but she knows that because she is proactive in developing solutions for herself, because she understands how her brain works, she is giving herself intervention first. Now, she has said this to me all week this week: intervention first, and it's brilliant because it's an approach that we use at Chatterbug, and she's obviously heard the phrase and she's applying it to herself. It's right. I believe in intervention first. I think quite often as speech and language therapists, we go into schools and we are confirming what the child or young person already knows, what the parent already knows and what the professional already knows, but actually nobody's done anything because they've been waiting for the professional to come in, or they feel they need some guidance. So I strongly believe some kind of universal screening is necessary. Ideally at key transition points when you're receiving a child or young person. I mean, the obvious ones are nursery and year one, but applying some kind of screening so you can identify these children and young people early is really, really important. And even at high school, because remember, speech and language difficulties and intelligence are not connected, right? A lot of our children with speech and language needs are super intelligent, and they know how to adapt and thrive. So they have learned to mask. Intelligence aside, children and young people know how to mask. So those children need even more weeding out. So even screening at secondary age, I think it's really, really useful. And the nice thing about intervention first is it delivers a block of intervention. And what you're doing as part of that intervention block, you're actually getting to know the child or young person more. And what happens with a speech and language therapist assessment is it's a snapshot of that child at that moment of time, right? And we all have good days and we all have bad days, but it's not a true reflection of our ability. So being able to observe and developing your own kind of observation checklist. So we have ours as a speech and language therapist, but developing something that allows you to observe those children and know what you're looking for helps you to identify additional areas of needs, and doing it in the natural context. So doing it during playtime or break time or informal activities. How do they handle those situations? And the third one has to be teacher training. Like, you know, it's such a complex field. I think I started off by saying that it's my special interest. It really, really is. You can stay in this profession for many, many years and keep learning. And for us to expect teachers and TAs to kind of know everything about speech and language and support all these children, I think that's quite an unfair ask.
No, thanks for that, Asma. And Rebecca, from the LA's perspective about identifying and monitoring SLCNs in settings, what's your take on this, and what would you?
So borough-wide, we've been on quite a journey over the last couple of years. We've heavily invested in a rollout of Welcome. So in terms of screening and intervention, we are now confident that all of our early years settings and our school settings, including secondary settings, have been issued with that toolkit, received training, and begun sort of that cycle during the autumn term of this academic year. So we've not quite had it embedded for a year to get our first capture of data, but in terms of really understanding what speech and language needs look like and where they present in the system. So children don't just come in, as Asma's already said, requiring speech and language support in their early years. We have our colleagues in the youth justice team, for example, where they will be seeing a cohort of our young people who also have additional challenges around speech and language. And so we've worked with that team as well in terms of workforce development to upskill and to educate, so that no front door is the wrong front door almost, wherever they touch our services across children's services, be it at the 2-year-old check with the help visitor, some contact with our youth justice colleagues, our colleagues in family hubs, colleagues in early years settings and schools. Everybody's received a base level of training and understanding. So it's an impossible task, like we've identified already, for everybody to know everything. But actually, over the last sort of 2 to 3 years, we've really looked at the different groups and teams across our borough who are in a position to support communication, speech, language, reading in some cases as well. And we've worked with providers like our local library service. So they provide sessions for parents called Shake, Rattle and Read from the earliest years. We've also got a session that's been adapted that works with one of our teachers of the deaf, so that we've got some really little ones who have additional challenges with their communication in terms of hearing impairments. So again, we're making it as accessible within the community from the earliest point as possible, but then not forgetting that there's still demand and an element of management, if you like, that still requires intervention in those teenage years as well. So it is very much how we've galvanised relationships across children's services in order to make sure that we can all intervene appropriately with the knowledge and understanding that we've got. And that's from modelling story time within our family hubs with some of those colleagues, all the way up to some specific training around the speech and language asset tool for our youth justice colleagues, and lots of things in between. It's about giving those teams the right thing at the right time and then supporting colleagues to do that. And all of that has had to be in conjunction with, of course, our speech and language therapists within our clinical teams, and privately commissioned and independent work that happens across some of our multi-academy trusts and academies as well. So it's been a real sort of journey that we've had to take people on together, rather than it just being something that's happened within our settings. It's been everybody's got a part to play to develop and support communication, speech and language, but what that part is might look very different. And of course, part of our training has been around, not overlooking what we might consider to be the obvious. Being able to have a story read to you once a week is better than having no story at all. But have we explored that with the family in terms of skill set and ability to do that, to facilitate that for a child or for a young person? And obviously there's lots of rhyme time type groups and that happen within our family hubs as well, that encouragement around using nursery rhymes. So really doing some of the stuff that we may consider or have considered to be, that's what everybody does, or that's how everybody parents, rather than immediately looking for that speech and language therapy referral as well. Because I think as you've said, Asma, you know, they were waiting for you as the professional to come in. Actually, we need confidence in our workforce in order to say universally, you know, we have somebody within our family, within our team, who can do this skill or does have this skill in order to support and promote individual children's development as well. So really important, the journey that we've gone on together. Colleagues in public health have been much a part of that, as has, you know, myself from an education perspective, and our specialists within health teams too. So very much a joined up approach.
Yeah, can I just come in there and say something that, Rebecca, it's absolutely speech and language. I think I started off by saying it's everybody's business. And if we're going to resolve this or make a difference, it needs to continue. We need it to continue to be everybody's business. It's about developing environments that support speech and language everywhere. And everybody needs to be involved. And one of the other things that sometimes is overlooked is we've done something and we've delivered the training, but it hasn't worked. That ongoing monitoring and review is really crucial, isn't it, Rebecca? That not to be afraid to come back and revisit this, because there are some fantastic tools and approaches out there, but if they're not working, it doesn't mean that the approach is the problem. It just means that something needs tweaking. So that ongoing monitoring and review is really, really important. And especially now where the world is changing so rapidly, particularly with the use of AI and how children are, you know, I'm so glad that you talked about phone calls. Absolutely. When someone calls me, I think, you know, somebody's actually calling me, you know, and we have to respect that children want to communicate and interact in a new way. I don't think we should embargo everybody and take everybody back to the 1950s. My favorite era. I wasn't born in the 1950s, but I do like it. But we have to evolve and work with these children and young people by giving them the tool that they need.
See, I'm going to listening to the both of you. Thank you. I'm going to pick up on the bit where you've said communication is everyone's business, and we all agree. I'm sure everyone on here, we all agree. Some may quite happily disagree, but one of the challenges, was talking about young people here, or you know, children and young people here, but one of the challenges often mentioned is the staff confidence itself in settings, or even people in the LA or in speech therapy in the industry itself. What have you found, you'd say, that helps staff feel more confident and consistency in supporting children with communication needs? What would you say to that? You know, what advice would you both give? Rebecca, let's start with you, please.
So we've done some work with our Senkos as well, so that they understand it's not sometimes about them doing the job, it's about them providing that assurance to other colleagues within their setting around, yes, they are doing the right thing. I think confidence is about having the right level of support as much as anything else, and the right resources. I asked around the office actually yesterday in terms of, you know, any tips and tricks for developing speech and language, given that I was coming to this discussion this afternoon, and I've got a whole list of things that are really quite straightforward and quite simple, from word walls. You know, do we consider displays and how they are helping support and develop literacy in terms of spelling overall, but how many times do we refer back to those word walls and make sure everybody in the class can say those words as well that are key to whatever topic it is that's happening that week. The value of circle time and modelling some of those other forms of communication around body language, tone of voice, and the expectations that we set within some of those opportunities. The use of talking partners to talk ideas through, structuring group work so that you've got models of good language and children who have got really good language skills to model those to other learners in the group whose language might not be as strong. So that's in terms of peer learning as well. Colourful semantics for sentence structure is a really popular strategy that we see across the borough. And then in terms of regulation and I guess emotional literacy and emotional language, the use of emotion cards and using something like zones of regulation. So using the visuals alongside the words, again, very, very simple, straightforward strategy to help develop language. And that can be from things like assembly routines or coming in after playtime where they can be reinforced with words and pictures to whatever the topic is that you might be studying within sort of your history and geography lessons as well. So Somebody also said singing in assembly, we need to do more of it. And again, that's about, you know, developing language and vocabulary in a way that actually the children realise that sometimes that's what they're doing. They're just enjoying the song.
Oh, thank you for that. And Asma, do you want to add something to that for me?
Those are some great list of strategies. You could take my job, Rebecca. Let's swap. Although I'm not sure I'll do your job very well. Maybe I'll just stick to mine. So for me, it's all about being practical. And I want to focus on 3 things. And I'm glad that you focus on specific strategies, because I'm not going to actually talk about specific strategies. The first thing I will say is clear and practical strategies. Staff feel more confident when they know exactly what to do, and they need to see strategies modeled. So if you have somebody within your setting that is great at a particular approach, Rebecca mentioned colourful semantics. Let's go with, if they're really good at colourful semantics, implementing that as a strategy, or having a book of strategies that you use within your settings in your schools, whatever you decide and whatever you agree with, but having some go-to strategies and having your go-to experts for those strategies. I think the biggest underminer of confidence is staff feeling that they have to be a speech and language therapist to deliver some of these things. And actually, a lot of these strategies can be learned. There's lots of training available out there. Chatterbug Academy has lots of training on individual strategies and approaches. So I would say that's my first one. Whole school consistency is really, really important. If everybody's doing it, it normalizes it. That's with everything, right? So if you're using visual strategies in one class, use it across the whole school. Not only does it normalize it for the staff, it also normalizes it for the children, right? So that's really, really important. As children, one of the biggest bugbears that I'm talking to schools at the moment is the amount of times they have to withdraw a child. And just thinking about my daughter, who's had quite a few medical interventions, and she absolutely needed to go to her medical appointment today. And she didn't want to, you know, because that's not what the other children are doing. I just want to be the same. That's what she said. Children don't want to be withdrawn from activity. And as they get older, withdrawing them becomes harder and there's more stigma attached to it. So if we can do things consistently and use consistent strategies across the school, it normalizes it for the teaching staff, but also for the children and young people as well. And then coaching. Coaching is the most underlooked skill, because you can go on a training and you're really excited when you come back. We've all been there. We go on a course, we learn everything about that course, we're completely sold on it, we come back and then we have to implement it, and then we think, well, I'll look over those notes tomorrow, and tomorrow never comes. And what you really need is someone to hold you to account and coach you and challenge you and remind you, because you've got all the knowledge. It's about then applying that knowledge. So I think coaching is really, really important. I think, like, I've talked a lot, and Rebecca has mentioned some fantastic strategies, so I think I will stop there. But one thing I would say is that it's not about knowing everything. It's about having a go and building that consistency, and also it has to be sustainable. And habit change takes time. Change of any sort takes time. So by attaching any new resource or process to an existing one, it makes it easier to build it into your school system. So, for example, visual timetables is an easy one. You already have some kind of a process around talking about your day. Just add a visual timetable into the mix. And don't wait to use a visual timetable when you need it, because it won't work. You have to be, the children have to be familiar with it. And even if you don't, if it's the same thing you're doing every day, you use your visual timetable consistently, because there will come a time where you need to change something in that structure and your visual timetable is there. But the key is anything that supports children and young people's speech and language needs, it also supports all children and young people. So yeah, so those are my kind of thoughts on that one. Yes, sir.
Well, thanks for that, Asma. And you know what? I'm gonna say, I was just trying to set a timer up right now because the next one, I want to put a timer on you. The pair of you. Because if you could make one nationwide change to improve speech and language communication outcomes in the next 5 years, what would it be and why? And both of you get 1 minute to answer the question together collectively. And it starts off with you, Rebecca. Timer goes. Let's go.
So I think it is workforce development, but that involves the community and the family, to have an appreciation and an understanding that it's everyone in a child's life who's responsible for supporting and developing their speech, language and attention skills.
Nice. Asma, go.
I love that. Rebecca, you went very strategic, so I'll go very granular. I'll give you top 3 strategies. Slow down. Processing time can make a massive difference. Use visuals to support spoken language, and model and expand language, because not only, so you're matching and adding what they're already saying. So we've gone the opposite way this time, because I'm hoping that by doing that, between ourselves, Rebecca and I have given you some strategic ideas, and I completely agree with what Rebecca said, and some real practical strategies that you can implement today.
3 seconds remaining. The pair of you, well done.
We did it.
Rebecca, hands down, took the least time out of the pair of you. By the way, I just want to add to that. Just want to add to that bit there. Yeah, that was a bit of a competition. There's no ifs and buts about that one, really, guys. And then another thing I want to say is, if our guys who are joining us today want you to start tomorrow, what would be the 3 practical strategies they can implement? Or if, depending on their role, if they're a TA who's joined us, or if they're someone who's trying to get to the Senko role, how can they actually go and seek support from the seniors, or what they can go and do to help themselves to be allowing them to start them strategies tomorrow?
Who would you want to ask that question?
I was going to leave it open to either one of you, but I didn't want to put a timer on it.
I mean, I've shared my top 3 strategies, but I think I'll come back to the one thing. You just want to develop communication-rich environments that support all children's speech, language, and communication development, regardless of whether they have additional needs or not. And I would be really looking at your environment, thinking about how does this space facilitate communication? Physically, adults, how they use language, and also other supportive strategies, walls that we use, posters that we display, our expectations around how we talk and communicate, and what we role model to parents, and what information we share with parents. So it's all around developing that really communication rich environment, and valuing that communication is very individual and is very different and doesn't look a specific way. It's about valuing all forms of communication.
So Rebecca, thanks for that aspect. Rebecca, I'm going to change a bit. What about local authorities that are struggling and just beginning their journey on the speech and language communication journey to support their settings? What, if you come at it from that point of view, please? That'd be really useful for them.
From an LA perspective, I think it's really important to understand your position. So whatever your data looks like, be it your public health data from 2-year-old checks, be it your early learning goals and what they look like borough-wide, your number of EHCPs with primary need, SLCN, it's all of that data that should help inform actually what can you do next and what needs to be done next if this is the scale of the challenge that we are facing. My number 2 would be to make friends with everyone. I think it's really important that quite often, some of my experience in local authorities, that people can work in silos in a big organisation. So really important that you make those connections with colleagues in public health, with colleagues in other parts of children's services, with our social care colleagues, with our youth justice colleagues, because actually it's everybody that's going to make a difference coming together and as Asma's already said, don't overcomplicate it. Sometimes it's the simple changes that are going to have the biggest effect. And then number 3 was consider communication in its broadest form. I think if we'd have just focused on speech and language, we'd have still missed a real opportunity in terms of some of the development our early years team have undertaken around train the trainer model for attention skills, which has been very much needed by our early years settings and very much appreciated. So consider language in its broadest form as you possibly can, and what needs support there too. Perfect.
Thank you very much. I'm going to thank you both for your insights. It's been really useful. I think there's a stat I want to finish with based on the Pearson School Report in 2023. 40% of teachers feel their training wasn't inadequate or adequate prepare them for supporting diverse communication needs. It's something what Joe's posted, which kind of aligns with this quite nicely, and I agree with you, Joe. And we're going to open the floor to questions in a minute, but like I said earlier on, please post the questions. We've got quite a few attendees, so opening it up on communication can get a bit. So if you've got any questions now, please post them in the chat, and we'll open them to Rebecca and Asma. While I'm here, I'd also like to introduce you to this Teaching First. This is people that are here obviously want to see that change. This is the 12-week program. What Teaching First does is literally allows people to attend a program for 12 weeks training for communication language as a CALS, communication specialist. I'm mixing my words here. And what happens is they get access to innovative products that we've developed over the years, which is a Bright Speech web app which allows them to screen. The app then tells them which area of need it is and gives them therapy program, modeling sessions and videos to see how it is. They can deliver intervention first and also access network meetings with SLTs. So the Teaching First is one of our latest offers, and has been really popular with our current clients and new people signing up. As well as that, you've also got the opportunity, if you would like, here you go, there's some more thing about this on-demand virtual training in your own classroom or your own location, Bright Speech tool. This tool is something to look out for. It's launching in its version 3 later on this year in September, October, and it's not only going to be delivered by us as Chatterbug, but other speech therapy companies that are also taking part in this as well. It's quite a big product. And one of the things we do here at Chatterbug is we constantly research. Where I personally am interested in that magic number of 6. I'm that magic number of 6 therapy. How do we know that works? I'm going to be a bit controversial here. And this is sort of data that we look at. We try to understand the pressures that we have and try to develop tools that kind of support not only schools, but anyone who's involved with children. Here's a link if you'd like to book a meeting, so you can just take your phones out and just scan the QR code, and you can book a slot there. And also we've got is a 25% coupon if you want to book a training through the Academy, which gives you, that's a code that's valid till July. The next webinar we've got the next webinar booked, which is, I've got a date, I'll tell you that, I promise I've got a date. Where's it gone?
I'd love to know if there's any topics, if you could put in the chat that you'd like us to cover. I mean, we have some ideas for the next webinar, but also we're quite excited about bringing new ideas to this webinar. We want to share information. So, for example, one of the ideas we had was around talking about how to use different therapy approaches like music therapy to support communication development. But we'd love to know if you have any thoughts or ideas that you'd like us to cover. Please do share. Thank you, Jess. AAC. That's a good one.
Yes, that is a good one. The next webinar has been booked on the 10th of July, so if you will get an email to register if you choose to do so. Right, so I'm going to open the floor to some questions we've got. No, I won't ask these guys how much the teaching course is. Amanda, we can just, if you ping us your email, we'll send out the details to you. That's not a problem. Guest language processing. Amy says, Asma.
Yeah, GLP. Yeah, again, GLP is fascinating, right? So for us as a industry, we for many years we almost forgot about this large group of children that developed language in a very, very different way. And rather than, so traditionally the linear way of learning language was, you know, you learn one word and you join them together and you know, form sentences. But actually, there are children that learn to develop those structures by chunks and phrases, and it's a very valid form of language and communication development, particularly those who are neurodivergent. So yeah, absolutely, we can do one on GLP. There is actually a GLP course on Chatterbug Academy as well. But yeah, thank you. Those are some great suggestions.
Any more questions coming in? When you guys have been out, have you noticed, just a question to the audience and yourselves, what was this? Oh, yeah. Have you noticed more children struggling with communication in classes, guys? I know I've been speaking to a few of you while I've been on tour. I call it on tour. Oh, thank you, Kirsty. 100%.
Yeah, I'd love to know. What are you? Have we covered the areas between ourselves, Rebecca and I? But what are you seeing in classroom that's different, that you feel is different from a few years ago? So Becky, yes, in our classroom it's massive. As in, I think what you're referring to is number of children with speech and language needs. Is that right?
And so, guys, Becky, Kirsty, what support would help you feel more confident in these areas then?
Okay. I mean, if you knowledge and support from management, yeah, absolutely. It's that whole system change. Completely agree. I think everybody needs to have a good understanding of the gravity, but also the long-term impact. You know, when I see the impact of early intervention, my daughters grew up in a neuro-affirming house, because obviously I'm a speech and language therapist, and to see how well they have coped with mainstream school because they had those skills well in advance of needing them. You know, it's been amazing. Like, I think to go through the education system as a neurodivergent or a child with speech and language needs and then come out of the other end, it's hard. You know, we are seeing individuals that are burnt out. What happens to burnt out children? Well, they turn into burnt out adults with tons of trauma. You know, when we think about trauma, we think about big childhood incidences that happen, but actually trauma can be anything. It can be anything that's life-changing to you. It could be having a pet that has been a big part of your life and then passes away, and not being able to not having the skills to really articulate and be able to discuss that with somebody. You know, we all carry various forms of trauma, and you know, speech and language skills are so crucial to be able to discuss and get that support.
Michelle, you've asked a question saying, is it open for support staff? Teaching first it depends. It is. I've gone back to this slide just because I didn't do any justice at the beginning, but I just want to explain you a bit of a journey here. When we've been around for many, many years, and I'm not a therapist, by the way, so let's be very clear on that. I'm not from any medical background. I come from a finance, tech, and science background. The Academy was launched because of many, many years ago of people telling us about the lack of training and trying to release staff to get them upskilled, and the Academy came about. We obviously do the traditional speech language therapy, and then intervention first asthma touched on that, which is a method of screening, delivering intervention, and then carrying out blocks of therapy. And that's delivered by our communication and language specialists. And then the Bright Speech web app, which is our version 3 development, which is being developed and will also be provided by other therapy companies around the world as well. In conjunction, we're developing with Bright Speech. And what that allows you to do is that system itself, you can screen the children on there. It tells you the area of need. It gives you the modeling videos to watch. So it's not just for the person who's being trained on teaching first, it's also for anyone else in their setting within the user license framework. And that teaching first is allowing the individual, may that be a support staff, may that be a teaching assistant, to be trained to deliver at that level of intervention first without the expensive overheads of having an individual constantly being hired to do that. So yes, the answer in short is yes, the support staff can do this, but equally, yeah, that's the short answer. But I just thought I'd give you that little bit of a journey just to sort of explain it, because I didn't do it justice the first time around. The Bright Speech app is one you can quite clearly tell I'm very excited about myself. But time will tell. I think that's going to be really positive for the industry. We're not just about, we're here not only to support you guys, but also would like to make a positive impression within the speech therapy framework and help other therapists, and make that positive change, because we're all in it together. Like Rebecca said, make friends. We're here to help, and this is one of the reasons why Chatterbug's been so successful over the years.
You know what? I've got a little short story to share. It was a few years ago. I can't remember exactly when, and I know that a lot of people weren't happy with this, but I thought it was a really good idea. But Clark's decided that they were going to train all of their staff to support, identify children with speech and language needs, and people were divided about this. But actually, when I say it's everybody's business, yes, absolutely. If that's where families are going to buy shoes and they're going to listen to somebody at Clark's, do I want to train all Clark's staff to identify children with speech and language and signpost them? Absolutely. The more knowledge there is out there about SLCN, and the earlier we can identify, the better. But also, I think a big one is, like Rebecca mentioned, communication isn't just talking. There are so many valid forms of communication, and we're cutting off a large number of children and young people because they don't have the language skills. But just not having the language skills doesn't mean you can't participate and contribute. There are days where I am non-speaking because as neurodivergent individuals, I do get overwhelmed and I do experience burnout. And this is me, somebody who's a speech and language therapist, has had a great career, and has done really well for the education system. So, if that was my only form of communication, well, and I couldn't access it, what then? People like me will be cut off from society. It's really, really important. I think everybody needs to understand it and share it. And somebody else in the chat as well, I can't remember who it was, but I just thought of a strategy that some of our schools work with them on developing a communication strategy for their school, and talk about their communication commitment and share that on their website and share that with parents. And it basically captures things like how you will induct new staff around how to support speech and language, to how you will messages that you'll share with parents. So that's something else to maybe think about if you're thinking about a whole school strategy. Think about what is your existing strategy around supporting children with speech and language needs.
Oh, Michelle, don't worry about it. I've got you on my list, by the way. I've read your comment. Don't worry, I've got you on my list of pilots, so not to worry there. Right, I think if there's no other questions, I want to thank everyone. There's a QR code if you want to leave us feedback. Please do. It does help us to improve these sessions. I want to really thank you, Rebecca and Asma, for joining us as our guest speakers and helping us during this session. It's been really, really wonderful. And guys, if you have any ideas and you want us to do other topics, please email in or fill out the feedback form. We're always open to hear. And I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.